On. Okay, thanks for coming. Oh, there's that lovely American voice there. All right, hello everybody. Thank you for coming today. I'm going to do a bit of a seminar on exploring employability development in engineering students, and I'll make sure these slides are available to you afterwards if you're interested. So just one or two things to talk about here. And just trying to, there we go, there it is. I would just like to get a bit of a feel for how much people know about employability, perhaps before we start. So if you wouldn't mind, just type in the chat there. So if you are an expert, you know it all, you're a master of employability, just type expert in the chat. If you know a fair bit, just put fair. And if you don't know a lot, but you're just keen to know about more, just type a bit more in the chat there so I can get a sense of what's out there. Give you a moment. More to fair, keen to learn more, a bit more, fair. Okay, so we've got a range there. It sounds cool, thanks. So what I'm going to do, in the business school as well, and more. Okay, so there's a couple of things hopefully I'll be able to talk about today, so that you finish with a bit of a feel for what's happening out there. And particularly this is in the context of what I've found through talking to our students. Going forward, okay, so what I'm going to talk about today, just a bit of a background about some of the reasons for doing a project related to employability. And in particular, at Griffith, we have something called the Professional Practice and Employability Skills Streams. And that was embedded within the curriculum. And I'll talk to a bit about what's actually in there. Then earlier this year, I finished a master's thesis or research master's thesis on employability. So some of the things I'm going to talk about in this project relate to some of the findings from that project, but also what we've been learning from embedding employability in the degree since 2017. So let's get started then. And I thought I might start at the end with graduates. Yes, we all want our graduates to get out there and hopefully get good jobs, but also we want them to know enough about what they're doing so they can actually perform in industry out there. So we start by looking at the end, and there's a couple of reasons for that, particularly because of government and industry outcomes. So let's have a look first at what does industry say? And I've got my my industry panel here sitting at the meeting staring at us. And some of the comments from industry have been around, this is probably across many different types of graduates, that my first point there, they often lack communication and interpersonal problem solving skills that industry feels they should have. My second point applies particularly more to engineering students in that while they may have some good technical understanding in their brains, they have trouble applying it to the real world practice that they need when they're working. And that's one issue perhaps related to having more project-based learning in courses, but that's another topic. But it's certainly something that industry notes, that sometimes graduates just don't seem to be able to apply their knowledge in an industry environment. So that's the industry view. Now, let's also have a look at our friends in government. As you may or may not be aware, there is something called the Graduate Outcomes Survey, where we are required to report the percentage of students that end up in full-time work. There's a survey every year, and generally it reports the percentage in employment about 4 months after graduation. So the second point there, you can see the 2021 current outcomes, Griffith 75, UQ 81, sorry, QUT 81, UQ 86.4. That's an average of around 3 years worth of data. And now actually when we first started this project, Griffith was a bit further behind, but it's improved quite a lot since then. There's still work to do, but there are reasons for this. Now, these magical numbers, there are some problems with them. And on the slide there, I've put, it's a bit hard to have this percent as being the be all and end all of a degree. And there are some critics. And my favorite quote is, this graduate outcome percentage is a really crude measure. There's more to measuring the value of a degree or the employment outcomes than just some percent. The second point there, it is heavily influenced by demographics. So for those of you who, I can see there's a number of people from Griffith, but for those of you who are not from Griffith, about half of our cohort is first in family. And particularly in Nathan campus, there's a higher percentage of students in low socioeconomic status. And also there's a large percent who have a second language background. And when you have all those factors in the mix, it does influence your graduate outcomes. So it's a bit odd to rely on just that percentage. And there was a quote also out there about it's actually the student who gets the job. It's not necessarily the university. So I'm not so sure that we should be making wonderful ranking tables. I don't have the reference there because I haven't read the paper yet, but I did note there was another paper which came out very recently, which was really tearing apart these graduate outcome percentages, but that's what the government is currently using. So we need to do something about them. So given this, so we had the industry perspective, graduates have their issues, government has some pressure on us to get graduate outcomes, university and our own school, we also want better outcomes. And considering all those factors, that led to this thing that we call the professional practice and employability skills stream. And it's embedded throughout the degree in such a way that every term students will have an assessment item related to professional practice or employability. And the next slide, I'll show you what the stream looks like. So on your screen now, you should be able to see what the current stream looks like. It has changed slightly over the years as I've learned more. So for example, in year 3, trimester 1, T1 stands for trimester 1, T2 stands for trimester 2. In year 3, tri 1, we now have a cover letter. I originally had that in year 3, try 2, but I got lots of feedback from students saying, these are great, but we need them earlier to apply for internships and things like that. So it was moved to year 3. Across the range of things you can see on the screen there are tasks such as preparing a CV, preparing a LinkedIn profile, preparing a cover letter. And in year 3, T2, they also do interview skills practice so they can learn about what it's like to have an interview. We use a software platform to do that. So there's a range of things that are about their career toolkit. That's the employability skills, if you like. In terms of professional practice, we also have things like site visits, industry guest lectures, and things along those lines where they understand a bit more about what it means to be an engineering professional or what it means to what actually happens in industry. In 4th year, they do actually have to go out and interview an external professional and reflect on what they've learned from that. But the key thing about this stream, they're all embedded in courses, and every student will do these tasks throughout their degree as part of the assessment for a particular course across all majors. That's what the stream currently looks like. So given we put this stream in and we started at the stream from 2017, it's now throughout the degree. So now we've got this stream. What now? So like my friend with the magnifying glass, I wanted to know a bit about, well, is this stream working? What's actually happening? And I have my friend also shining a bit of light in the darkness there. I did want to try and do a bit of a pilot study first to try and find out a bit about, well, what do students think about employability? What do they know about it? And is what we're doing working at all? And so that started with a project that I've worked on for the last 2 years or so. And these were some of the research questions that were involved in figuring out about this particular project. So first off, what on earth does employability mean to students? Second, what are some of the things that students felt helped build their employability? And also the third one, well, okay, this is employability thing, but how does it change over the span of a 4-year engineering degree? Is it the same? Is it different? What happens? And so I wanted to look at those types of areas. So before we go into that, we might need to talk a little bit about what on earth is employability anyway. And when you start going through the literature, there is a bit of academic discussion. So I've got my friends there punching each other. There are 3 general, there's a number of approaches, but they're generally categorized as possession, position, and process, which I've got on screen there. And so I'm going to talk through about each of those briefly, just so you get a bit of a feel for, okay, what's actually in the literature right now. So possession, there's a long quote there. I'm not going to read it all to you, but basically possession is about employability, is about having the right skills. So you've got the skills, you've got the personal attributes, magic. You will walk out there and you will be employable. So it's generally about having the magical skill set that you need. Now, there are some minor problems with this in that, okay, so skills, what does skills mean? And when you look through the literature, there's so many phrases, and I've got some sample ones on the screen now. Generic, core, there's a whole load of them. Now, what do they actually mean? And it's kind of hard to get an agreed list on, okay, what is a generic skill? I can imagine in my own head what it means, but that doesn't mean that everyone would agree with me. They do vary quite a lot. And my second point here, there is a lot of change about the skills that employers value. So one employer will value one skill set in one industry, and a different employer in a different industry will value a different set of skills. And even within the same industry, they will argue and not necessarily disagree or agree about what skills are important. So we can probably say, and it's been said by Hinchcliffe and Jolly there, employability, it's not just skills. You don't just magically get this set of skills and suddenly it's magic. It's more than that. So let's have a look at the next. Position, yes. So employability, this is the second approach. Employability, it's all about the race. That is, it's positioning yourself in the market. So my friends here are all lining up against the start line, ready to race, and there's an employer at the end. But within that race, there's lots of factors. The labour market, what's happening now. In Australia at the moment, I'm getting emails almost every 2 days saying, can you promote civil jobs to graduates? The demand is insane at the moment because it's an infrastructure boom. But that it may change every year. It's not always going to be like that. Social background, yep. Your social background, your contacts, that also is a big factor. And the prestige, how your university is viewed that you attend, that falls in the mix as well. Now, moving on. So what's some criticism of this? So some criticism might be the first point there. Recruitment's not always rational or transparent. And if you've ever been involved in panels, it's often that way. It's not always as transparent as you would like. So sometimes what you might expect doesn't always happen. The second and third points I want to talk about is related to universities. So for those of you who may not be from Australia, G8 universities tend to be the more established universities. They've been around a long time, very research focused these days, and probably amongst the richest universities in Australia. Now, some employers may feel that graduates from those universities are automatically better, or maybe it's those graduates from those universities might be able to automatically use the university reputation, the contacts, the networks, all those things are an aspect. But it actually turns out that Group of 8 grads are only slightly more likely to be employed in the long run. So it may perhaps be an initial advantage, but it's not the only thing. Employability is more than that. And in my next point, this is the approach that I think is becoming the main one now. Employability is actually a process. It's not just magical skills, and it's not just your position. It's actually about a becoming process. So you develop an identity, and that identity is recognized. So for engineering students over time, they'll develop their identity in such a way that at the end of it, there'll be an employer somewhere that interviews them and says, yes, you're the person I want, for a range of reasons. So there might be another microphone on there in the back somewhere. I'm not quite sure. I can hear a bit of noise in the background. So one thing, employability is more than just skills. And one quote I really like is employability, it's being recognized for who you are and what you can do. So it's not just this magical list of skills you have in your bag somehow. It's about who you are and what you can do. So it's really key to be able to articulate that to an employer. So moving on, in terms of articulating, if we want to do something about outcomes, it's really clear that graduates from any university can influence what their chances of getting their dream job or whatever it may be, or getting a role. They can take action. There's things they can do to increase their chances or affect their chances of getting the job they want. And Bridgestock's got quite a good paper out there. We do need to help students develop these skills that they're going to need so they know how to influence employers. And particularly for a university like our own, or any university where there's lots of first in family, or there may be social economic status and things like that in the mix, there is an onus on us to do something about that. So that's one of the factors that the professional practice stream attempts to address. Let's talk a little bit about employability. So what on earth is it? There's lots of factors within it. And there's one model I quite like. There's a number of them. And this one's quite good because it's got a couple of different factors that we can focus on today. So on the left, this model comes from Clark. On the left, you'll see there's a variety of capitals. That is human capital, your skills, competencies, work experience, things like that. Social capital, the individual behaviors, how you manage your career, the skills you've got to build a career, and your attributes. So if you're really, really shy, you might have trouble in an interview, for example, but you also need to have those characteristics. That set of factors all mixes into this thing called perceived employability. That is, how when you look at yourself, how likely do you think your chances are of getting a job? But you do need to influence that by what's happening in the labour market. As I said before, at the moment, there's a supply for civils is just insane. I'm posting jobs so often, probably civils think, yay, I'm going to get a job as soon as I walk out the door. But the labour market does influence how employable you might see yourself. And that perceived employability and the labour market leads to graduate employability. And there are 2 or 3 models like this. Tomlinson's got a really good one as well. But I've got time to show you one today. Now, I want to talk about perceived employability because this is particularly what I did when trying to find out how does employability change over a degree. So there's some definitions there. What is perceived employability anyway? It's that chances of believing in themselves they're going to get a job. It just so happens, and my second point, there is a scale called the perceived employability scale, and you can use the scale to get a feel for how employable someone perceives himself to be. Now, within that scale, there's a couple of factors based on reputation of the uni, your belief in yourself, what you're studying, and the labour market are there. It's quite a nice little scale and very easy to use, and it spits out a number between 1 and 5 after you've averaged the 16 items. So a 1 would probably mean, oh no, you don't feel yourself as being very employable, and 5 would mean you are the god, and as soon as you walk out the door, and then employers will be fighting for you. One of the items on the scale is that one I've put in there in italics, the skills and ability I possess what employers are looking for. There's a range of different items. That's one of them. So let's have a look at this. What's been found about these? They haven't all used the same scale. People use different ways to get some findings about perceived employability. And I've summarized them a bit on the table here. Crenani, McDougall rather, and Sexton, having an internship and being able to manage a career generally would boost your perceived employability. Females generally saw themselves as being less employable than males, and final year students generally saw themselves as being less employable than earlier years. That was one study. The next study in the middle, Jackson, no differences male and female, mixed findings re-year levels. That might have been something to do with the labour market. There's a lot of reasons why that might have happened, but there wasn't a clear conclusion for how does it change over the years. And there are 2 papers at the bottom, Donald and friends, really good papers. Similar conclusion that females see themselves as less employable than males. And this is where it gets a bit more interesting about the final years. They do see themselves as more confident because of the skills they have. So I'm a final year engineering student. I know a lot now. I can do lots of things. I'm great, but they are aware of the external labour market factors. They know what it's like. And so again, at the same time, they get less, they feel less employable in that sense, even though they're more confident in themselves. So there's an interesting aspect there about final years. Now, these papers didn't all use the same scale I did. They used different approaches to try and get a way of how employable students feel, but I wanted to use a scale. So let's go back a moment. So the questions that I was asking are, or what does employability mean to students? What activities do students think build employability, and how does it change? So these are the things that I was looking at again. So what did some of the findings were, and how did I do it? So first off, we did a survey. At the end of 2019, we surveyed the third and fourth years. I wanted to get a feel for them closer to the end of their degree. So the third years would have actually had 3 years of professional practice stream. I guess that was implemented in 2017. Fourth years, they wouldn't have had much exposure, but yeah, they're bound to have had a work placement. Some of them would be on work placement during that term, others may not be. And then the following year, I went after the first years, and we also thought, why not we grab the second years too? I was early in their degree just to get a feel for how employable would you feel. It's week 5 of your engineering degree. You probably don't even know what your major is yet. How employable do you feel at that moment in time? So we did a survey first. In the survey was the perceived employability scale, some questions about employability, and one question was quite direct about, well, what could you do to employ? It's not all about the university. What could you do to improve your employability? Although I did ask them, like, what has Griffith done? What could Griffith do better? But I did want to try and ask them about what they thought. Now, again, one trouble with this is, although I did a nice survey, the response rate and the sample size is a bit small. So there are about 842 eligible students, and I only got 13.4% of them. Sadly, I would have liked a lot more, but it is what it is. So I must highlight that limitation about the sample size. Then after surveys, a focus group. I did 3 focus groups, and I've given some details on the screen there now. They were all asked pretty much the same set of questions. There were 4 first years, 4 first years, 5 third years, and I've put fourth years in red because I only had 2 of them, despite many attempts to recruit. And I didn't want to go after students that I could just know. So it would have been a bit biased if I went out and grabbed more fourth years that I knew personally. So I did try and do an open recruitment. So at first I was panicking, 2 fourth years. Oh no, what am I going to do? But there is this concept of, I think it's Longhurst mentioned initially a similar experience where they had a very small number and thought, oh no, I've failed. This is not going to go anywhere. And he referred to them as failed focus groups. But in doing that, the data that came out of it was actually, as I've quoted here, rich, thick, and broad. So I decided, right, I'm going to go ahead with these 2 fourth years anyway. And actually, when I did interview them, or through the focus group process, they did have quite a lot to say of value. So it actually worked out quite well. So moving on to some things that we found. So here's some of the types of questions they were asked. So tell me what you understand by employability. Not only what have you done, but why. I wanted to get some sense about why they think activities improve employability. And I also did ask them as well, how do you think it changes? And I wanted to use that to complement the survey findings. Moving on. So after much fun with coding, so I had all the survey data and I had a look at what was in there, coded all the survey answers, and then used some of that in the focus group activities to drive the questions. And then after focus groups, we ended up recoding everything again to make sure that it was all consistent. But there's a couple of things that I'd like to highlight. So let's talk about the first question. What does employability mean to the students? So pretty much after coding everything, the majority of students, or majority of the cohort, or the largest percentage of the cohort anyway, felt that employability was having the right skills, attributes, or competencies. Engineering often revolves around the stage 1 competencies, and they hear me talking about it all the time. So I wasn't surprised to see the word competencies come up. So in red, I've put having the right skills, attributes, or competencies. That came out double the number of responses or codes to the next 2 in blue. So being desirable to employers, or just getting employed, that's employability, and having a career. Those 2 were about even in terms of distribution, but having the right skills was double that across the cohort that I was able to access. So certainly they tend to align with employability being skills or competencies. Moving forward, now here's a little activity for you. So when looking at the activities students indicated that they felt were relevant to employability, I coded them in the following way. And I gave each focus group the same list in a random order. I took the top 9, and you can see on the screen now, ranging from participating in extracurricular activities down to, at the bottom, job research, application, and interview skills. The most important activity is 1 and down to the least important 9. And so I asked the students in focus groups to rank this, not because I was so much interested in their ranking, but I wanted to get the discussion they were having while ranking. But there's something I'd like you to do. So audience out there, I've been speaking for a little while, time for you to do something. So there was one activity, first years, third years, and fourth years all ranked at number 1. What activity do you think that might be? So again, first years, third years, and fourth years all ranked the same activity as most important. Please paste in the chat or type in the chat, which activity do you think would be the most important from that list? I'll give you a moment. GPA, getting the degree. Time for one more. Work experience, developing skills. Oh, we got a nice range. Job application, interview skills. Okay, thanks everybody. And the winner is Melissa. It was actually work experience. All 3 year levels put work experience. Good, I can see the A come through there now. All 3 year levels ranked work experience as number 1. Things like developing skills came also up quite high, but the number 1 was a unanimous work experience across the options. Now, one more question, and this one's a bit harder. The first years ranked something relatively high, but the third and fourth years put it at the bottom. So both third and fourth years ranked this particular thing as number 9, least important of the set, but the first years ranked it a bit higher. What do you think that might be? Fire away. So what was the thing that third and fourth years ranked lower, but first years ranked relatively high? I'll give you another shot. So Andrew Bush, GPA, Steve, GPA. Any other comments, ladies and gentlemen? GPA. I can see you all reading my mind through the Zoomness. Yes, actually it was. First years, they ranked good marks grades a bit higher. It wasn't first, but it was up there in the top 3. Whereas the final years students and the third years, they both put get good marks grades or GPA at the bottom of the list. Yes. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, sometimes they think that, oh no, the GPA is gone. But yeah, they certainly did put that down there. I was expecting them actually to put employability assessments and workshops a bit lower, but that might have been because they all know me, so they were nice to me. That came out, I think, at number 8 across the set, but GPA came down relatively low, which was kind of nice to see. And they've worked out that it's not the most important thing in the world, as long as it's above 5. So we've talked a bit about some of the activities that they ranked. Now, I did have to recode some of these after the focus group exercises. So what I'm going to do now is I'll show you a couple of things. So after going through that ranking exercise, because I was keen to get at some of the reasons why they were putting things in a certain order. And after merging the survey data and the transcripts, I was able to go through and regroup some of those particular activities when I understood a bit more about how students perceived them. So I'm going to show you now the order of activities that students felt built employability, not in an order of their greatness, but just the number of times it appeared in the combined data set with a little sample comment for each. So these were the current final codes for these areas. So at the top, participating in extracurricular activities came through, and I've put a little sample comment for each. I won't read those. I think you can read them yourselves if you're interested. At the top, the example comment there was a student who mentioned joining the Griffith racing team, and he actually used that experience to get a bursary from the Australian Power Institute. Networking with industry came up quite a lot. Work experience and thesis is an interesting one. It also mentioned that after work experience, I was able to gain this information and skills that I know is important rather than being told, because I suspect it's probably some of the same skills that we tell them are important, but they'll believe it more because they're in a work experience position, which is fine. The fourth one down the bottom, developing technical and professional skills. This comment comes from a female first year student, and she mentioned that working in projects is also a really good way to build employability, because it's linked to experiencing working with different people, different opinions, and somehow having to come to a consensus about what you're going to do, much like you might have to do in a workplace. So that's some of those ones on screen now. Here's some of the other ones. Job research came up quite strongly. There's a student here who mentioned that he'd been doing cover letters for ages, but just didn't have much success because he didn't actually know how to do a cover letter. So there was a really lovely comment from that particular person. Developing industry understanding. I originally had like site visits, I think, and guest speakers separated, but it became one code. And students referred to, in a first year course, we would generally go out on a site, visit a site to go and see, well, where does your degree go? We did this in 2017, 18, 19. Couldn't do it last year because of COVID. I'd also wanted to refer to guest speakers. So there's a comment there about how guest speakers open up your mind about what actually happens. This is from Shami, who's a male third year. There were a couple of comments within the focus groups about if you're going to have industry guests, it's good to have someone relatively recent at an early career stage so that students can relate to them. Or we've also had like 2 or 3 guest speakers come in, and they might have someone who's more senior, someone who's more junior, because the students in the focus groups commented that it's really hard to relate to someone who's like a retired engineer. There was one course some 2 or 3 years ago. They had a lovely guy, but he's probably in his 70s. And a lot of the students felt, well, how can I relate to this guy? He's not an engineer now, although he may be very experienced, but I can't relate to that person. So if you are going to have industry guest speakers, they mentioned that it would be good to have someone who's a bit at an earlier stage in their career because they can see themselves. Good marks and GPA did come up. There was a comment here from a male 4th year, GPA over 5. That's partly probably because me posting jobs all the time, and it often says minimum GPA 5. So when they see that GPA 5 thing, it does give them a bit of pressure, but perhaps a good pressure, I think, and hopefully the ship hasn't sailed for these people. And a very simple comment down the bottom for just doing the degree. There were some comments about, well, you have to do the degree to be able to be an engineer. And from the first year, well, I've got to do the degree because I need to start somewhere and I need to learn the basics. I also did ask students, well, what could we do better? And these are some of the things that came up. We could do more with industry. So increase in industry engagement was something that came up a couple of times, particularly in the view of, well, let's make sure that local industries know about us and will approach us for students. And there's a comment there from someone saying, well, connect with local employers better, so it's easier for students to get jobs. The second one was about, well, can you give us more support with finding our career? And interview skills was mentioned a couple of times. So I actually inserted that into the professional practice stream so that we got 3rd years to do interview practice. I did find, although we have a central career service, I think most students don't use it or don't know about it. So we have tried to promote making use of those things. Work experience, that's a big one. A lot of students were often stressed about finding work experience and they wanted more help for doing that. And the last one's an interesting one. Students wanted to see, well, are there some other things we can do that can complement a degree or put us ahead or give us an advantage, some additional skills that perhaps would work well for our particular major. And this particular person suggested maybe workplace health and safety, maybe project management, or even trade skills. We've actually looked at that trade skills one this year because one of the government colleges, TAFE in Queensland, approached us this year to promote free welding workshops. And there's been quite a good response from mechanical engineers into doing that. But it's also considering, well, what other skills could we potentially add, perhaps not necessarily in the degree itself, but what could we offer that students can do? So those are some of the things I suggested could be improved. Okay, let's move on. Let's look at the survey. Okay, I found similar results. So survey says perceived employability drops. So you'll find on there, again, sample size is still relatively small. So I've got 31 first years and you can see in the table there, average perceived employability. Again, it'll be a number between 1 and 5. And it turns out that yes, first years and second years were very similar, but it does drop 3rd and 4th year being the lowest. Interestingly, it spikes a little bit for 5th years who would be in a double degree, but there's a small number of them. So the correlation is significant. So the result of perceived employability dropping as you progress through the year levels aligns with some of the previous findings. But the double degree one is interesting, those 5 fifth years. I need to explore that a bit more. There's not too much research out there on double degree students, so I might have to have a look at that and find out if they do really feel more employable or not. Let's move on. Now, that's what the survey said, but before showing those survey results to anyone, I actually asked in the focus group, well, how do you think employability will change? And the first years were like, oh, employability, I'll be a god by the time I get to fourth year. The third years had a similar view. They said employability is kind of flat in the early years. And then one student mentioned it's going to skyrocket high in fourth year. There were comments also about, well, you don't really think much about employability in year 1 and 2. You're focusing on getting good grades, and employability becomes something you think more about when you get to third year. Also, the third years were making comments about, well, yeah, we now know a bit more than we did at the beginning of the degree, but we certainly would like work experience to validate our skills or give us a chance to apply our skills in the real world and just make ourselves feel more employable. One comment from Sage, female third year, did mention that, I hear that, you learn the main stuff in the job, and uni is just like getting you ready so you can get the job in the first place. And there were a number of comments along those lines in terms of you need the work experience to hone your skill set and recognize what you can do. Fourth years were interesting. They did mention feeling more anxious towards the end of year 3, because many of them will try and find an internship at the end of year 3. And also they do get anxious about their workplace course in fourth year, about finding a placement. What's my placement going to be? The process is a bit anxiety inducing. And one of them, Steve, a female fourth year, mentioned that job is still like a drumbeat at the back of your head. It's always at the back of your mind that, hey, I'm a fourth year, I've got to find a job pretty soon. And there was a comment in the survey, which I've highlighted in red, from a male fourth year, mentioning that I didn't actually expect this anxiety to come. So I'm now a fourth year, I'm searching for a job, and my anxiety is going crazy, but I didn't actually expect it. So they probably don't realize this is what's coming in the fourth year, I suspect. Moving on. So I did ask the fourth years about, well, do you, as a fourth year, as a mighty fourth year, do you feel more employable in the third year? And the general comment, again, is it's about that stress. They certainly feel that, much like I might have said before, fourth years, probably they feel they know a lot more and they would feel more employable in terms of their skill set and what they can do, but they're not nearly as stressed or anxious. So it's that anxiety coming in again. So I've got my two friends on the slide there that are all looking anxious and serious, because that end of the degree is a fairly stressful time about getting the job and moving on. So, and there's a lovely phrase with this, again, in the literature. Final year students or later year students, they do have this crisis of confidence as they get closer and closer to the job market. So we need to do something about that. And that's something we're hoping to address through the stream. So what now? Some general thoughts and findings and things. Because there was a bit of confusion about what is employability anyway, with some of the cohort thinking employability is skills, some think it's being desirable, some think it's employability is just getting the job. We're going to be a bit more explicit and say, well, employability is about becoming a professional. It's building that identity. I've put a citation for Jackson there because Jackson's got a paper about building a pre-professional identity. And there's a lot of work now about how to best support engineering students to build that identity. And for us, project-based learning is one of the ways of doing that. It's not the only way, but it's a big part of it. So I'm going to now start explicitly explaining to students and defining what employability is. And throughout the stream, it's about becoming a professional. For engineering, it's very easy to align that with the stage 1 competencies. So we already do that in many ways, but I'm going to again make it more explicit. How does your course relate to the competencies that you're going to need to be an engineer? Really focusing on that, becoming a professional. My second point there yes, students do need the embedded support. It's madness to not have embedded tasks and just say, go to the careers office. Doing that is just madness. You do need to have a clear plan for how best to give students that career toolkit so they're ready to apply, or they're ready to find work experience, or they're just generally preparing the things that they need. And that can also be about, well, researching their industry and finding out what on earth does an engineer actually do. So there does need to be that support, and it needs to be embedded, and I would argue it needs to be assessed so that they'll actually do it. Extracurricular alone won't work. It's got to be embedded and assessed. The third thing, I still need to do a bit more about what else we can do to prepare final year students. There's always going to be anxiety. I don't think we can make it go away, but there may be more that we can do to look at that. So recently we put an interview training assessment item into third year to try and help with that. And I just need to find out a bit more about what else can we do to help fourth years. Okay, so I'll now onto my last slide here. For anyone who's particularly interested in the slides, you can get them. I've put a little link at the top there, tinyworld.com. You can get the employability slides or from this presentation if you wish. And there are two particular areas or resources or papers, if you like, that might be of good interest. The first one is about a review of the literature in recent years. There's so many papers out there, it's amazing. But if you're at all interested in employability, the Higher Education Academy in the UK has just put out a literature review recently. I think it was only out within the last month or so. And it's quite a good resource to look at to get a bit of understanding and a starting point for what's happening out there in employability. The second point, Sally Mail and Robin, I think it is. I think it's Robin King. There are some really good guidelines for things that we can do in engineering degrees to ensure or to increase that awareness of professional practice through industry engagement. And that's something that, although I'm talking about engineering degrees here, I think whatever degree you might be working in, it might be useful to think about how can you engage with industry through your degree so students get exposed to what it means to be a professional. And on that note, I'll say thank you very much for listening to me for the last 40 minutes or so. And I hope there was something useful in that presentation about the delights of employability. And I'll hand over to you, Ivan.
Thanks, Simon. That was very interesting and also useful. If you have any questions, can you please write them down in the chat, and then Simon will be happy to answer them.
Yep.
So, right, Simon, that's okay?
No problem at all. Happy to take questions if there are any.
I like it how like you talked about first year students, second year students, third and fourth, and like what they think about like their job perspectives and like things like that. I think it's very important that we look at this, you know, starting from first year, like not only like final year when it's maybe a little bit either too late or maybe like too much stress for students.
Yes. Right? Yeah, it was interesting speaking to them about their perspectives across the years. I also did ask them, when do you start first thinking about employability? And many of them mentioned that it was about third year when they really started thinking about taking employability seriously. But it was also, I gave them an assignment where they had to write a CV in first year. And a couple of them commented that when I did that task in first year, I had to do a CV. The only thing I could put on it was my GPA. So I didn't have any experience or anything. And that provoked them to thinking about, well, maybe I should do some extracurricular activities, or maybe I should do something to make my CV represent me and who I can be, rather than just, okay, I'm doing a degree and my GPA is 5.3. They needed some other information there. So certainly giving them employability related assignments can prime them into starting to think about their own employability. So that's one thing to consider as well.
Thanks, Sam. So any questions?
Simon, I have a silly question on the side.
Yeah.
What do I need to do to speak so well like you do? Is it your headset and microphone that is special? Or
Oh, it's all in the microphone. It's
is it on
special.
the
You have to
microphone?
be silent. To
And
speak
What is
with
the
it's
brand
silent.
of the microphone?
I've got this bottle of vodka here inside my water
Oh,
bottle.
you speak my language. The
Yeah,
vodka is
yeah.
not helping me.
Yes. No, it's probably many years of being in front of a classroom, I think. But I do have a reasonably good headset. Students were teasing me about it at one point. I'm told it's a gamer headset because they were all asking me to turn.
Can you let us know the brand of your headset?
Yeah, sure. It's a Razer, I think it is, and I'm using this make voice deep filter on it, and it's just a nice headset. It does a good job, I think. Perhaps
Simon, very good, and hopefully school will sponsor every staff one headset like you have.
I think you should. I agree, Zung. I think we need to ask the head for that. Absolutely.
Yes. Well, I mean, certainly in electrical engineering, this one actually comes from Andrew Seeger because I think he had some spare ones. So I'm sure the school can should be able to supply. I can mention what they are. It is quite a nice headset. I'm using my son's one at the moment, but he has the same one as mine.
Okay. Thanks for the presentation. It was lovely.
Cheers, man. Thanks.
There are some questions. First of all, Hugo saying thanks, interesting presentation. Okay, I think that's Sharif also saying it was really good. And also, Sharif, that's your course, right? 3004.
Yeah, 3004. Yeah. That's the there is a interview work in there now because at the time there were a number of comments saying, you know, we find interviews really stressful and we'd like to know more about how to do interviews. So we use a system called the Big Interview, but there's an assignment around it to give students practice. And I should acknowledge also Gail Brent, who's out there in audience land, has been quite helpful with some of the employability work. And I think I also saw Chris Allen there somewhere, who's also been of good advice in designing some of the tasks related to competencies.
Thanks, Simon. I was planning, we have site visits in year 1 and also in year 2 for some courses, like for my course. So is it helpful for students? What do they say? Do they like the site visits? So, like, doesn't give them some like idea what to expect after the graduate or things like that? Yes. I mean, does it work or not, the site visits? Especially for the first year students, because we have like every year, right? We have those like big buses, we put them on the buses, send them to like different companies.
Different sites all over the place. Yes, it kills me every year organizing those. So actually, one good thing about COVID is it reduced my workload significantly in terms of organizing site visits. But they do make a lot of good comments about site visits. I think my favorite comment is something like, it was an amazing chance to see engineering in action. It also leads to jobs. I took students to Airbus in Brisbane. I think Andrew Bush was with me. Also took another group up there, probably Hugo as well. And so one year we took students to Airbus, and a couple of the students later looked up Airbus when they became second and third years. And one of them actually applied for an internship at Airbus and was working there during third and fourth year. There's another site visit where we took people out to Riviera it's near the Gold Coast. It's a boat building firm, and a student got an internship on the same day as being there. He just spoke to people and made an impression, and he got an internship on the same day. So site visits are really good for showing people what engineers do, and it links some of their course content better in terms of how is it applied. So I really love site visits as long as they're assessed and you've got the right type of task around it. It is a bit of a nightmare to organize at times, and COVID has kind of stopped that. Yeah. Oh, that's right, Hugo. Yeah, you took out to Masters Young, and they've taken some people too. So site visits are really, really, really valuable. Incredibly valuable. Helps people figure out what their major is as well.
Thanks, Sam. Belinda made a comment about extra skills that maybe we can offer to Griffith students, and you talked about it, right? So that that would be nice for students to have these extra skills. And then you also did something like welding workshop or something. Can we
Yes,
do like more of like such things so that maybe we can help our students to get a little bit of like more like extra skills, like not only like, you
yes,
know, like
yes.
classroom skills. I mean, also like hands-on like skills.
Yeah. I'm sure we can. It just happened that the Queensland government must have had some funding this year. So it meant that I was contacted by TAFE, who said they had funded places for Queensland residents to do welding. But there can be other things too, like students could, or we could recommend, I think even Stephen So might have done it, but previously, students doing like machine learning courses on Coursera or one of those areas. LinkedIn Learning, you can do things like, again, machine learning or Python, or you can get little certificates, Excel or whatever it might be. We did run a series of workshops this year to try and do extra things, but I think there are more things that we can do. So perhaps each discipline should be thinking about what other hands-on skills could we potentially give our students, and how are we going to build that either into the degree. It probably has to be assessed somehow, but I guess what does industry say is missing? What hands-on skills might be valuable? So for a civil, maybe there's some particular things that are missing. Maybe it's use of particular software.
Yeah, that's true. We can think about it and maybe see how we can help students with these extra skills that are required in the industry. Okay, I can just ask you maybe a final question for today's webinar. You talk about interviews in year 3, right? So is it like mock interviews when people from industry come and then just sort of interview students? How does it go? I mean, how do you arrange this?
There are 2 or 3 things we do. One of them was actually driven by the students, and what they did is through the student clubs, they organized like mock interviews with industry. So during Employability Week this year, students could register to have an interview. There was a range of different companies, and that was organized by the student clubs. I think I might have given them some context, but I think they did the bulk of the work in doing that. In terms of inside a course, there is a software platform called Big Interview, which is available through the university. And in that software, you can set an assignment where students have to record their answers to a series of questions. It's quite a nice system. There's a range of prepared videos of people asking questions. Like there's one where there's a very serious looking interviewer saying, why do you want to work for our company? Or there's a range of different questions you can ask. So it's an interview training platform. And so I get the students to do an assignment where they have to record themselves answering questions, and then it's rated by AI automatically. We don't mark them on what they say. We mark them on a reflection that they do on the experience. But certainly having industry people in to do mock interviews with students, that's a great initiative by the students. We did it during Employability Week this year, or you can use a platform like a Big Interview to practice it.
Yeah, thanks. Well, if no more questions, I think we'll conclude this webinar. Simon, thanks a lot again for your time, for your work that you have done in the past several years.
No worries,
it was really interesting, useful for many of us, I believe. There are things that we can do to improve, right, in the future. So we'll just keep it in mind, and thanks again. Thanks everybody for joining this webinars. I really appreciate this. We'll try to run another one in December, and we may have somebody from India, our Indian colleague, to talk next time. So please watch for emails that I am going to send out soon with the dates and the time. Thanks, everybody. And
cheers.
Have a nice day.